Hello, good afternoon, good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for having me. I was really excited to be invited to visit with this group again. I have the best memories of the last time that I got to meet with you all. So just real quick, here is a snapshot of where we are in the United States. Each bar on this graphic shows the number of new shortages that have occurred during that calendar year. The exciting thing is that during 2020, we recorded the lowest number of brand new shortages that we've seen since 2007, which is very encouraging to me. But of course, there's always the downside. And what this graphic tries to show is that those shortages that we have each year are not going away. So this graphic shows the number of ongoing and active drug shortages. So we're really close to, I don't know, maybe 260 to 70 drug shortages at any given time, which is a lot. And what that means is those shortages that are happening over time are not going away. The types of drug shortages that we see are very much the same. We've got antimicrobials and cardiovascular agents, central nervous system agents. Hormonal agents have taken over ophthalmic agents. Those two seem to compete, but those are the types. And in this graphic, the green portion shows the injectables. So really quickly, just as a quick summary of these numbers before I want to get into kind of what progress the US is making or lack of progress the US is making. During 2020, we experienced a severe demand shock for many drugs due to the COVID outbreak. This is unusual to have a shortage caused by a demand shock. Most shortages in the United States are caused by a quality problem. And so that was kind of an unusual element for the past year. Half of the new shortages that we identified in 2020 were injectable products used inside hospitals. And again, that low number of new shortages is encouraging, but the shortages aren't resolving in time. So many of you may know that the FDA put together a very large task force. This was ongoing from former Commissioner Scott Gottlieb. And they held a public meeting at the end of 2018. And I was at that meeting and presented a couple of times, but the main things that each group of those represented wanted. So FDA was hoping for more reasons, more information about the capacity of contract manufacturing organizations, as well as a little bit more information about API sources, especially if a supplier was approved to use more than one. Manufacturers talked about how they need guaranteed volumes as well as long-term contracts to do a good job and to have a good supply. And then purchasers, folks like me, we wanted more information about the quality of the medicines that we're buying, maybe a quality rating so that we can make a better purchasing decision. And of course, we want product to be available. The FDA issued their report, and it was, it was a pretty dramatic report in a way because they came out with some pretty bold statements. They talked about the causes of shortages were, lack of incentives to provide these low-cost drugs, elements of not recognizing quality and manufacturers not having mature quality systems, as well as a discussion of some of the logistical and regulatory challenges that are there that make it difficult for a new supplier to come and meet that challenge. When they talked about solutions in their report, they talked about creating a shared understanding. As someone who has done research on drug shortages for 20 years, I believe we have a shared understanding, but that's fine. But they also talked about developing a rating system to incentivize drug manufacturers to invest in quality management maturity. This has not yet happened, so but it's out there, right? And then they're also talking about promoting more sustainable private sector contracts to help shore up the supply. And so, fast forward to the pandemic, we had the CARES Act in the United States, and this gave us quite a few of those elements actually that hadn't been acted on from FDA's report. So FDA is going to be able to get more information about the reasons for shortages, as well as contract manufacturers. Manufacturers are supposed to establish contingency plans for a disruption. There are supposed to be some types of incentives developed to produce drugs in shortage. And then, of course, there are some studies that have been commissioned. And so when we look back to that, to kind of that, what people wanted, FDA got quite a bit of what was on their list, but other folks, not so much. And even though the CARES Act is a law, many of those elements are still very, very nebulous and still in the works. This is one of the commissioned studies from the National Academies of Science. This is a group that is, I'm a part of this group in full disclosure. We will be issuing a report early next year. And so we'll just see what we can find. It is a very large task to write a report to delineate what would truly help shore up the supply chain. And then in the meanwhile, I think we are seeing some movement, especially by ISPE. They are working to try to help manufacturers and suppliers to meet some of those requirements and recommendations from the FDA report. So there's a recent article on business continuity planning. There's also a report on increasing domestic resiliency for APIs. And I will tell you that in the US, there is a huge interest in onshoring production. And that is one of the elements that our group is being asked to look at. But I will say that just because something is made in the US doesn't mean that it is a high quality product. And it doesn't mean that all risk of a shortage is eliminated. And so that is one of the elements that we're working through. At the end of last year, at the end of the Trump administration, some large amounts of money were given to private sectors to develop API. In the US, pretty much no strings attached. And so I know there is additional legislation coming that would hopefully, as monetary incentives are being put forward to bring more production to the US, there would be some strings attached as far as requiring some quality elements. And then we just barely had President Biden give an executive order on America's supply chains that was basically the same charge as the study that we have been commissioned to do over 18 months. But this executive order asked the government agencies to do this over the course of a year. And so timing wise, I think we will have the last word. So that is nice, but we'll see what happens really. So just to sum up, there are some new ventures ongoing in the US. I will mention just one, Civica RX. This is a not-for-profit drug company that hospitals have come together to form. They are very interested in, they have started building a manufacturing facility in Virginia, in the United States. Their goal is to improve supplies. They use a long-term contract method where hospitals have to commit to purchase a certain amount of product over 5 years. And if the hospitals don't purchase that amount, they still have to pay. And so that long-term contract will hopefully give the contract manufacturer the incentive to actually make the drug, because they also have that guaranteed volume. So if we think back to that gap analysis, that was one of the items that the manufacturers were hoping to have as far as their ability to make a sustainable supply. We don't know if it will work. It's the second year anniversary of this company. They've only been having product for just over a year now. So we'll see. I think right now is a very good time for action because the pandemic has really highlighted supply chain for everyone. Even in the mainstream media, people are talking about supply chain instead of just a few of us nerds like in the past. So we know that onshoring is a popular idea in the United States, but we know it will be tremendously costly. It may not even be effective. So we'll see if it will work. But it is a good time to work together to mitigate the patient harms that the drug shortages are causing. My contact information is here, and I'm happy. I do have time. It's so early here. I do have time to stay on as well to the end to answer any questions. So thank you so much for having me. It's really fun to see your faces.
Great, thank you, Erin. We have. It is great that you can stay with us for the whole session. So we have already question or a few questions, and we have time, so maybe I will ask them. What is the US definition of a shortage? This is the question. And another, are there plus minus 300 shortages considering e.g. substitution and or alternatives? So these are the questions.
Those are great questions. In the US, we don't have one overarching definition of a shortage. My shortage that we use for the American Society of Health System Pharmacists for the largest tracking in the US is when a shortage impacts the way that a pharmacy has to prepare a product. So if you have to use a new formulation or a different concentration, or if a prescriber has to use an alternative, or if therapy has to be delayed. FDA has a different definition. They say that a shortage occurs when there are insufficient supplies of a medically necessary drug. And FDA did recently issue a list of medicines that they consider to be essential. However, it is related more to the pandemic. So for example, ibuprofen is on that list as an essential medicine. You could argue that, do you need ibuprofen? Maybe yes, maybe no. But they were charged with providing that list based on the pandemic. So that's the definition. And then those kind of 250, 260 active and ongoing shortages, many of them do have substitutes, but some don't, especially thinking of the chemotherapy agents and some of the antimicrobials. The situation in the United States is we can usually get some formulation of a product, but it may be the wrong concentration or the wrong formulation. And it requires a lot of manipulation and work that creates safety issues and can cause harm to patients. So that is my long answer, sorry.
Thanks, and there is another question. Are there plus minus 300 you can estimate the share of generics on versus on patent? So it is another question, and yet another. As you experienced the lowest shortage in the USA level since 2007, have you tried to look at the root causes of such a decline?
Those are great, excellent questions again. The majority of those drugs are generic. Very, very few are on patent. I would say, I don't have the exact numbers, but in general, each year when we calculate them, it is less than 10% of these products are on patent. Usually when a brand patent drug is in short supply, it is because there is a problem at the contract manufacturing facility. Most of the branded companies have a resiliency plan for their branded products, which are much higher cost. And so they have the incentive to not have a shortage of those products. And then as far as root causes of that decline, part of what we think is part of that good news is that Pfizer has spent what they tell us is $2 billion to rehabilitate 4 facilities inside the United States that make a large number of generic injectables. Those factories have been coming back online during 2020, and so we've seen fewer shortages and some shortages resolving. So that's kind of one of my main theories. But you know, our pharmacy buyers will say there's nothing left to go on shortage, Erin. So that's why the rate is low.
Thank you. We have another question. Dear Erin, great presentation. Is there a strategy for developing mechanisms for quality control for API?
That is an excellent question. I know USP is working on a current plan, but it is in the early stages. And yeah, I know ISPE has issued their report as well. So those are the two plans that I'm aware of. Thanks.
Maybe I will ask a question. You know a bit Europe and differentiated systems generally in Europe. Systems can be completely different, of course, than the USA. But maybe your thoughts. Do you think that any of American solutions could be adopted in also in the European countries? Any of the European countries? Do you think there are any lessons from the USA to differentiated European healthcare systems? You know, the pharmaceutical supply chain is very global, and so I do think that if we can get to some kind of a quality metric, quality rating system to help just improve the overall manufacturing quality of all products, that will help everybody, the US, Europe, everybody. So we haven't gotten there yet, but I know there is work going on there, and I think that would be top of my list. Okay, thank you. Maybe we have another, thank you very much. We have another question from Jane. Erin, when you spoke to us before in Leuven, you mentioned that almost all supply information in NDAs is completely confidential. Did I gather this has been relaxed? It has not. It has not. We still see the lack of transparency. You know, FDA will be able to get a little bit more information, but that information will not be public. So FDA will get more information about which contract manufacturers are being used and some information about capacity. But we're still fighting the transparency battle. We need that. Okay, thank you very much. And maybe yet another question before we move on from Liz. Are there any considerations for large-scale API extraction from waste medicines to provide stores to buffer shortages? That is a fascinating idea. I haven't thought about that. So now you've given me something to think about. Okay, thank you very much, Erin.